perhaps nothing is more telling of where the U.S. economy could go next than President-elect Trump's cabinet nominations. Trump has tapped Tesla CEO and billionaire Elon Musk, as well as entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, to head the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. This new agency would focus on slashing the federal budget and effectively dismantling parts of that federal government. Meanwhile, Trump has picked tech entrepreneur David Sachs to be his administration's AI and crypto czar. His nomination coming as a surprise, as he has very little involvement in the crypto industry. And when it comes to trade, Peter Navarro has been nominated for Senior Trade and Manufacturing Advisor. Navarro has a history of being hawkish when it comes to China and has clashed with more moderate trade officials in the past. Let's get some insight now into how Trump's cabinet picks could impact the economy if they are all approved eventually. And for that, we're joined by Carl Schramm. He's a university professor in the School of Information Studies at Syracuse University, also a fellow at Johns Hopkins Institute for Alternative Economics, Global Health, and the Study of Business Enterprise. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Trump, last time, 2016, he went after some real tried and true Washington insiders. He later said that was a big mistake. And this time, he's made it clear he's going for what he calls loyalty. Many of his choices have raised eyebrows, but Trump is Trump. So what do you believe his goals are this term?
Well, I think one thing that's unmistakable is he's going about the selection of a cabinet with a great deal more care. I think, the 4 years that he had in Washington were very educational. Trump is a very smart man, and he's learned that when he went to Washington, there were a lot of people that he took advice from that he couldn't really trust. And I think the selection of the cabinet this time now, some of the picks are unconventional, but for the most part, he's taken a huge amount of advice on people and their talents and, yes, their loyalty.
So where's he getting this advice?
Well, there's a host of people in Mar-a-Lago who have been working on the transition long before he won, who had been thinking about the reconstruction of one executive department after another. So I know for sure that there are people down there in Florida who have a great deal of experience, understand these executive agencies. Many of them have worked in them.
Right.
Many have been on the Hill. And I think that's where the principal advice is coming from.
Yeah, and it's pretty clear he wants to blow up the way Washington has traditionally done stuff. We hear tariffs, tariffs, more tariffs, Mexico, Canada, and China. Look, and there's been rough sailing between China and the United States for some time. But what can U.S. allies expect if he's really pushing tariffs among the borders to the north and south?
Well, I think they're going to make a bet that those tariff threats are real. And I suspect even before the president-elect is inaugurated, we will see movement both in Mexico and in Canada for sure. I think Prime Minister Trudeau is already having a difficult time keeping his province premiers, in order. Many of them want to break apart and basically say to the United States. I just heard a moment ago the Premier of Ontario,
right,
the major provinces, has volunteered to go down to Florida and talk with President Trump. So even inside Canada, you will have a lot of conflict about how to deal with the threat of tariffs.
Okay, let's talk about Trump's economic team. Jerome Powell, Trump indicating that he wants to keep Powell. So how difficult is it going to be for those two to work together? And do you believe that Powell will remain through his full term, which I believe is mid-2026 or so?
That's a hard, that's a hard crystal ball to look into. I think the friction between the two of them is pretty intense. The president-elect is probably likely to keep him for a while, if nothing else, for avoiding another drama over the Federal Reserve. But you can be sure that as the Trump economic plan is constructed, the issue of what the Federal Reserve is about to do, how predictable it is, will in fact be gnawing at that team. They have a very, very strong and powerful commitment to growth, domestic growth inside the United States. That's what drives the tariff issue. It's what drives all the investing issues. I think fundamentally that is what's driving the notion of trying to blow up a number of the executive departments. They just spend too much money. They're too heavily handed in terms of the regulation they impose on the economy. And I think there's a huge amount of pressure to do something major
I
in
would
terms of
argue
trying
that
to get back.
conversely, it's always been politically hands-off. Let the Fed do what it wants, but Trump doesn't want to play by those rules. So moving on a bit about that, his decision, Trump's decision to create new roles, what does he hope to accomplish with non-governmental agencies in positions like the Department of Government Efficiency, AI, cybersecurity? Because Elon Musk, he gets huge amounts of money from the federal government. So A, should he be telling Trump where to spend? And B, an efficiency overhaul has been tried several times before, going back to Reagan, and it's failed every time.
Yes, I think it has. There's no doubt about it. We've seen it at least 3 times in my lifetime where there's going to be a major, reduction of spending and big overhauls. I think it's really radically different this time. This was the promise that was made in the campaign to the American people. I think what's happened in the last 4 years is the electorate basically saw the breakout of all kinds of crazy ideas over sex transformation and all kinds of other things. So I think this is actually driven much more by a cultural shift in the United States. So I wouldn't bet against it. Now, to your point about, what are these agencies that are being developed? First of all, DOGE is essentially an informal government agency. It's not going to be formalized, I don't believe.
Yeah.
And it will basically be pushing mostly an analytic agenda on all the people who are in these appointed offices.
It's interesting because I've heard a lot of people speculate that Elon Musk could in no way pass a background check, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. What about markets? We've seen how they've reacted so far. They've done continuing on that level at the end of the Biden administration, and the dramatic rise of Bitcoin. So what is the likelihood that this momentum is going to continue?
Well, I think it all depends on whether or not the president is successful, which I suspect he will be, in really making a show of growth, moving up our GDP by as much as 1 or 1.5%. That'll be his total focus. I think that'll drive issues around his relationship with the Federal Reserve. It'll drive his relationship with the Congress over spending. It will be all focused on growth. He's a real believer in it. And I think to the extent that we see real reform inside the federal government, it'll all be focused on one word, and that is let's reduce regulation and unnecessary involvement in business by bureaucrats.
Okay, we'll see how that plays out. There has a sort of mixed track record in the past, but this is a new world, new administration. Carl Schramm, thank you so much for your insight.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.